Be bold. Be brave. Be extraordinary. Be vulnerable. Be real. Be curious. Be true. Be you. Welcome to Trusting Your Gut with world-class energy intuitive Catherine McIntosh, a show designed to awaken you to enjoy the process of evolving, have fun along the way, and learn to listen to those silent in-between moments. You are the expert of your own life, and nobody knows more about the next steps to take in your journey than you. So please, listen to your gut and discover what's waiting for you to explore. Here is your host, Catherine McIntosh.
All right, my magical friends, so welcome to today's show. As always, we have interesting topics to talk about, and it's really revolving around intuition, life, and this crazy adventure we're all on, because it's pretty rare to have a human body here living on the planet. And I think sometimes we take it for granted. And so today I wanted to kind of do a topic that may come across as a little controversial. As always, I'm not a medic, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist. I do have training in some of those things, especially in psychology, but this is really just my opinion. And so please take the information as such, and hopefully it contributes to you wherever you are on your journey, wherever you are in the world. So today we're going to talk a little bit about spectrum, right? And it could be a topic of controversy because of the label that it's given. So when we say somebody's on the spectrum, sometimes it's referred to as autism or Asperger's, or maybe somebody just doesn't quite fit the bill. It could also be you've been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, right? And here's sort of my own sort of philosophy on it. And it's probably a conglomeration of a lot of things. I've spent my life being fascinated by the human condition, being fascinated by the mind-body connection, being fascinated by the psychology of what makes us tick. And every single one of us is very different. For example, I wouldn't label myself as autistic, but I definitely am on the spectrum, especially when I'm doing my intuitive readings, when I'm channeling. There's always this information that kind of comes at me, especially when working with somebody or working with a group of people. And I can never explain where the information is coming from, but it's like I have this channel open, and it allows me to see what somebody, never meeting them, never seeing their face, not knowing what they look like, kind of be able to pinpoint some of the things that may be going on in their life or in their childhood or their stuck traumas, and I'm able to unlock it. And so the spectrum is really just it's an ability, and we've labeled people as if their label, right, their diagnosis is a hindrance or a problem. And the only reason it's a hindrance is because they don't fit into normal society in the way that they should. And so kids get diagnosed all the time with ADD or ADHD, and then they get put on medication when in fact they're just not big fans of the way that our current school system is operating, because our current school system tells a kid to be quiet, tells a kid to sit still, tells a kid to pay attention, but pay attention to one thing. And so most children have these sort of optic capacities to broadband and receive a plethora of information all at once. And if they're being told they don't pay attention, well, the question we need to be asking is, what are they paying attention to? Are they daydreaming? Are they doodling? Are they, sort of fantasizing? Are they really smart in the world of energy, but not so smart in the subject of math? Are they really brilliant with colors or sounds, but maybe they're not so good at geography, right? And so I think that there's a different conversation that we need to be having about not just children, but us as adults in general. And we're so quick to throw a diagnosis and throw a medication at it, right? And I think that's also what creates a lot of diseases, is that we're not allowing our sort of natural state, our magical world, our miraculous energy, right? So if you think about it, an elephant, I have an elephant tattoo, and people are always asking me, what's with the elephant? Like this weekend, I was at a party on the East Coast, and someone said, "Oh, are you a Republican?" I just went, "No, definitely not." and but I've had a lot of people ask me, because I have an elephant tattoo, if I'm Republican. A lot of people go, "Oh, you like elephants?" Yes. So elephants are aware of up to 10,000 miles around them at all times, right? Maybe it's 8 to 10, somewhere in there. And so in 2004, and I've given this example several times, but in 2004, there was a tsunami that hit Indonesia. And 3 days prior to the tsunami hitting the island, all of the elephants went to high ground. Now, if the humans would have gone, ooh, what do the elephants know that we don't? A lot of more lives would have been saved, because the elephants, through their feet, could sense the vibration of something coming. Whether or not they knew that it was specifically a tsunami is yet to be determined, right? But they did know, sorry, I'm having hair day issues, but they did know that something was coming and to seek high ground, right? Pretty fascinating. And so I believe that as humans, we also have these sort of radars and these energetic capacities to perceive frequencies, to perceive sounds, to perceive energies that we can't yet explain. And so before I knew that my body was so tapped into the energy of the earth, to the energy of people, right, I would have these anxiety or panic attacks. And then I'd find out that the moment I was having the panic attack was the exact time that there was an earthquake happening, or there was a natural disaster happening, or there was a war happening, right? And so often we have these sort of intangible gifts that can't be seen. They don't fit into normal societal rules and regulations, right? And then we want to not only label and diagnose it, but our society has been entrained to then put a medication with it. And so when I was in my early teens, I was going through a very hard time, because it was a time that I was coming into a deeper layer of my sort of intuitive, psychic, healing, sort of channeling gifts, but I didn't know it. And so I was being bombarded with this information, and I started to get really angry and act out and lash out on my family. So they sent me to a psychotherapist. They sent me to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist basically said that I have a psychotic disorder that would probably need medication for the rest of my life. And so at 13 years old, this very sensitive, very in tune, very confused teenager who had no frame of reference for what was happening to me, even though I'd had it as a little girl. But when we sort of increase our hormones, when we go through puberty, I didn't hit puberty till 17, but at 13, it started to happen. Right? The portal was kind of coming in a really massive way, and I had no frame of reference for what was happening. So I started to feel insecure. I started to have anxiety. I started to have pretty intense anger outbursts, right? And I would take it out on my family in the form of yelling, right? My brothers and I would get into fights. It wasn't the best experience, and it created a pretty toxic environment for all of us. And look, I wasn't the only one, but all of us were going through some form of something challenging, and none of us had the tools to know how to deal with it outside of going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, right? And look, there's nothing wrong with seeking support in all forms, but we want to make sure that the form that you're seeking is supporting your gifts and supporting your brilliance instead of suppressing it, right? And so, for all of you out there that may be listening, right? And if you are listening live, you are welcome to call in. You can ask me any question, right? And I'll do my best to sort of channel an answer for you. And I always tell people you can, to take it with a grain of salt, right? I'm still human. I definitely make mistakes. I mess up my life pretty good. But if you'd like to call in live and ask me a question today, specifically about the energy of being on the spectrum, right? And we're going to get into it for any of you out there who are parents, for any of you out there that work with kids on a daily or weekly basis, right? But if you want to call in live and ask a question related to this topic, you can dial 202-570-7057. I'll say it again, 202-570-7057, and be happy to answer any question that you have that you would like answered live, right? Live. That's right. So the point is that, especially as parents, so I just had the pleasure of meeting this 2.5-year-old recently. And he reminded me so much of my son, so much of my son. And so, I was having a conversation with the mother, and I was like, he's fine. He lives on a different planet. He functions from a different place. So he's a little late to speak. And my son, I'll talk about my son. So my son didn't really speak until he was 3.5 or 4. And for the longest time, my son and I had sort of this nonverbal communication going on. So I could hear his requests. He wanted to go outside. He wanted to hug a tree. He wanted to lay in the grass. He wanted to, jump in the water. He wanted milk or food. I kind of always knew what my son needed before my son would ask for it. And so he learned, maybe by fault of mine, but really, I think one of the greatest forms of communication that we need to sort of teach in the school systems is the language of energy, right? We're not taught, and yet kids come in with this innate ability to speak, right? Energy. It's their primal form of communication. And so it might be auditory, it might be like with visual. They're constantly trying to communicate. And sometimes as adults, right, we might be mute or not aware as to their form of communication. And so my form of communication is the world of energy. I've been able to travel around the world, go to countries where I don't speak the language, and I get along quite nicely. I am fluent in Spanish, which helps in a lot of sort of Latin, like the Latin root languages. But I've gone to other countries where I don't speak the language, but I speak energy. And so I'm able to communicate. I'm able to get what I want. I'm able to sort of function quite well when I'm traveling, because my energetic field, it's my sort of my natural and innate language. And it's the language that I think that we all came in with. But as we sort of age, as we try to fit into the school systems, as we deal with teachers and tons of kids, it's like that innate capacity starts to get squashed. It starts to be made wrong. Like my son is definitely like his genius is he's physically intelligent with his body. Some people are energetically intelligent. Some people are emotionally intelligent. Some people are school, sort of facts intelligent. Some people AI. Like we all have these different gifts. And are we, both as adults and as parents, are we encouraging that in ourselves and in our children? And so when my son started talking, he would say the most fascinating things, right? And he had no insecurities, no shame. Most children don't until they're either have a serious trauma or it's kind of beaten out of them through parenting or schooling. And so, when he started speaking, he would say the most fascinating things. And I was like, where did you come from? And he's like, Mommy, I told you, I came from the mountain. And I would get these visions and visuals of literally like my son coming out of the middle of a mountain, right? And he was born entirely in the call. For those of you that don't know what that the call is um, is when your amniotic fluid, your sac doesn't break, and so you're still in that sort of film that they get carried in when they're in the womb. Most people, it's called your water breaking, right? The water breaks, the baby comes out. Sometimes they'll have like some of the skin on their shoulder or over their head, which is called a veil, and they're all psychic omens. Well, in Tibet, right, they look for children born entirely in the call to make them the next Dalai Lama. And so I knew that my son was special. I knew that he was special when he was in the womb because we had these very vivid, visual, energetic exchanges, and we'd have these conversations, right, that weren't necessarily verbal, right, with physical words, but they were definitely auditory. I could sort of, they were visual, and it was really fascinating. And my son would show me these images of what he wanted his life to look like, and I was like, um, and I remember looking at him in my belly one day. I think it was like 5, 6, 7 months pregnant. I was like, you do realize where we live, what I do for a living. If you want that to be the vision of our life, I'm going to need your help. And so oftentimes I don't think that we invite our children, right, to help us, right? I don't think that we invite the universe to help us, nature to help us, or animals to help us. But as we sort of get off of labeling this energy of being on the spectrum, some of the most brilliant minds in the world, if they were to believe the diagnosis, take the medication, they might stifle their genius. Einstein, probably on the spectrum, right? What's it? Thomas Edison, probably on the spectrum, right? And so it's not a bad thing to be on the spectrum. It's when we try to fit in to societal norms that it becomes problematic. And then we start seeing diseases, or we start seeing, mental disorders, or we take, our kids to the doctor, we take ourselves to the doctor, and then they diagnose us with maybe ADD or ADHD, or maybe rheumatoid arthritis. Like, I believe a lot of diagnoses come from us not living our natural state of existence. And I have the pleasure of working with people all over the world who are some of the most brilliant, fascinating minds. And they all have a gift that could have easily been squashed in childhood. But here's the deal is I think that we need to bring back the idea of daydreaming. I think we need to bring back the idea of inspiration, right? So in the book Think and Grow Rich, he talks about that the biggest wealth creator in the world is imagination, right? And yet In a lot of school systems, we are not encouraging imagination. In a lot of corporate settings, we're not encouraging imagination. And yet, imagination is probably one of the greatest vehicles towards personal success, right? Towards life changing ideas that could support the planet, right? There's some kids, these brilliant kids that are coming up at 12, 11, 12, 13 years old. They're coming up with these incredible ideas on how to make our planet better, to make our world better. And I believe that now more than ever, we need to encourage our own imagination as well as the imagination of our children. And so when your child gravitates towards, right, for example, video games, they might be a programmer. And so we're so get off the screen, get off the screen. I'm not promoting that a kid should sit on a screen for 10 hours a day. If my son does too much screen time, he gets grumpy and we set a boundary, right? No screen time during the school week, right? No Xbox for sure. But he is allowed to use his screen to watch things that he's fascinated by and topics, because Google and YouTube are amazing resources where we can encourage our kids to develop their imagination instead of try to fit into, right, the societal norm. Right. And so I think it would be fascinating. I haven't really been involved in it, but what if we brought back, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's more like, what do you want to be now? Right? Most children, when they're 2 or 3, they wouldn't say they want to be an attorney. Now, maybe someone does. Some 2 and 3-year-olds know they want to be singers. They know they want to be dancers, right? They just do it because they absolutely love it. My son was basically came out of the womb physically adept with his body in ways that were quite surprising. And so one of, I think, the greatest tools that you can give yourself and you can give your children is this idea and this concept of be aware. So instead of be careful, be safe, right? Be aware, because awareness is the greatest tool that allows us to keep our sensors open so we can keep our channel for imagination, for inspiration, for our brilliance, for our gifts, and for our greatest form of communication, which is in the language of energy. Right. And so you want to invite yourself, I like to be aware. Where do you gravitate your energy? For me, it's the human condition, right? I'm fascinated. Mind, body, human condition. I'm fascinated. Like when I travel, I was just on several planes in the last week, and I'm just fascinated by striking up conversations and being curious about what people do for a living. And I am always shocked at people's sort of career paths at their jobs. And I ask, how did they come about that? Right. And when somebody is doing something that they absolutely love, the way that they most likely came about it is that they followed their innate wisdom. They followed their intuition. They followed their imagination, and they followed sort of the expansion, right? So there's always, when we're going towards things that make us come alive, there's this moment of expansion. And all of us pay attention to it. We just might not label it. And so it's about being curious about what your children gravitate to when they are on their screen time, right? What are they watching? What are they scrolling? And maybe help them, sort of guide them into places where they come alive, right? instead of places where they start to contract their energy. Same for adults. Maybe you're watching a movie and your energy starts to contract, turn it off, right? Maybe you're watching a Netflix series and your energy starts to contract, turn it off. Go towards the people, the conversations, the lifestyle, right? The magic in which your energy starts to expand, right? And so sometimes we can get obsessed with material possessions. We can get obsessed with the status, right? We can get obsessed with cars or homes or clothes or purses or, brand names or whatever it is. But what happens if you start to pay attention to is your energy expanded around this topic, around this person, around this group of people? Where does your energy and your fascination and your mind go to that expands your world? Because what happens is if we don't sort of actively pursue the curiosity of where our energy expands, we by default will put our attention to where our energy contracts, right? And that could be stress, it could be anxiety, it could be weight, it could be a diagnosis that you're trying to fight or change. What happens if your body is just trying to give you the signal that you are in a contracted state instead of expanded state? And so these children and adults that function from a different set of energetic principles, right? They don't want to regurgitate certain geography, or they don't want to regurgitate certain math. Now, I'm not saying that people don't need these skills, but encourage the skills that they love, and then give them skills they need. So when my son was 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, right, people are like, oh my god, he has a speech problem. And I was like, no, he doesn't, right? I was very adamant. Now, he did develop a little bit of a lisp. He had a hard time with ths and sp and other like ph. He had a hard time with those. And we did put him in speech therapy, and they just encouraged him. And now my son, is pretty good with his words, but he definitely has a way of being in the world that doesn't necessarily fit into the way that schools are educating him, right? And that's not a cut on his teachers. It's just an observation that if your kids are in a regular school system, you want to take the time outside of that school system to encourage them, to be their guide, to witness where they expand their energy, where they get curious, where they get excited, where they spend their time, right? And encourage it every step of the way. I had a conversation with someone over the weekend, and they basically said, I believe that I got to where I got to because at a very young age, my mother said, you can do anything you put your mind to. If you believe it, you can make it happen. And I believe that we need to start as a whole encouraging belief, encouraging, right, trusting in yourself, encouraging sort of the mental capacity, because it doesn't matter where you are in the world, what you do for a living, who you are, right, whether you're a household name or not. Every single person that I've ever come across has some insecurity. And that's not a wrongness. We're taught to get rid of the insecurity. But the truth is, you might not ever be able to get rid of the insecurity. What you want to do is change your relationship to the insecurity. right? So recognize when that insecurity arises, you're prepared with tools to seek the expanded energy of possibility instead of focus your contracted energy on the insecurity, right? Because what we go, oh my God, that's my insecurity. Let me go to the therapist, right? Well, there's my insecurity. Let me call my mom or my best friend. Oh, there's my insecurity. Let me hide in a hole and eat bonbons to deal with my anxiety around my insecurity, right? And that sort of method of focusing your energy in the contracted space, or focusing your attention on contracted energy, it sets us up for mediocrity. It sets us up for failure. It sets our kids up for failure, right? They're saying that now more than ever, kids are not that great at spelling. Why? Because the phones do it for them, right? Because Chat GPT does it for you, right? And so there's basic life skills that um, are being compromised because of technology, right? And yet, look, I'm all for technology. I'm all for AI. And yet we want to encourage, right, the expanded places, not just focus all of our energy on the contracted places. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back with more on this topic. So stay tuned. And if you want to call in, right, I'll take a live caller if you have any questions, right? So you can call in. I'm just pulling up the phone number, 202-570-7057 if you'd like to call in and ask your question. So we'll see you after the break.
Times TV.
Do you trust you? Do you trust your body? What if the key to unlocking the weight, pain, suffering, fear, anxiety, addictions, traumas, and sorrows was already inside of you? Learn to love the skin you are in so you can create the body, business, and life you love. Everyone always says you can't explain what Catherine does, you just have to experience it. From Hollywood actors to New York Times best-selling authors to some of the world's wealthiest and most successful, no two experiences are the same. For private sessions, online courses, live events, and the latest book Jack Canfield calls Game Changer and should be required reading for everyone, go to katherinemcintosh.com. KatherineMcintosh.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
I want to eat apples and bananas. I need to eat apples and bananas. Why can't I eat apples and bananas?
Support the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks to help provide meals to those in need. Join us at feedingamerica.org.
All right, so welcome back to the show. We are talking about, I think, a topic that is probably affects more of us than we know. And it's about being on the spectrum, right? Or just the spectrum in general. And I truly believe that if you or anyone you know has been labeled, it's actually a really big gift. But what happens is when we label it, when we diagnose it, when we throw medication at it, what we're telling somebody intrinsically in their world is that who they are as a being isn't enough. But the truth is that people sort of on the spectrum, this also includes ADD, ADHD, is that we try to tell them that they don't fit. And so if they start to intrinsically internalize that they don't fit, that they're not like anyone else, it starts to create their self-esteem suffering. And when somebody's self-esteem suffers, guess what? Their sense of I am starts to suffer. Maybe their bones might start to not be as strong. They might feel insecure about standing up for themselves. Maybe they have thyroid issues, right? A lot of people, and women in particular, but men as well, who deal with thyroid issues, I believe one of the root causes is a severe lack of self-esteem, lack of confidence in themselves, feeling like they're not enough. And I deal with a lot of women who struggle with weight and have been diagnosed with thyroid issues. But in reality, when we start to work with the root cause, which is self-esteem, which is sense of self, which is security, which is also awareness and knowing thyself. Remember, because we don't want to contract our energy and make ourselves small, which then creates panic attacks, creates stress, creates anxiety, puts our nervous system in fight or flight, which also affects digestion. And when your digestion is compromised, your sense of self and who you are in the world can also start to get depleted or diminished or suffer, right? And so for all of you out there listening, you are not wrong. There is nothing wrong with you, right? There's no problem to solve about you, and there's nothing to fix. What we need to start paying attention to is how do we encourage the genius? How do we encourage the gifts? How do we encourage and get back to this imagination, right? We were not born to fit in, right? We were not born to make ourselves less than by comparing, right? By contrasting. We were meant to celebrate everybody's unique gift. And if we start to sort of encourage those people, right, that are on not fitting the norm, right, as society likes to call it, on the spectrum, if we started to encourage it, I believe that we would have a better planet, a more sustainable planet. I believe that far less people would suffer. I believe that we'd have far less medications, but the big pharma, right? The pharmaceutical companies, they like when people are suffering because they make more money, right? And so for all of you out there, if you have a diagnosis, that is totally fine, but filter it through your own awareness, filter it through your own intuitive system. Does the diagnosis, does it expand your energy or does it contract it, right? Most people, when they get a diagnosis, their energy contracts. And so what we want to start to look at, if we truly are going to live longer, live healthier, and live more vibrant, more connected, more sort of aligned with ourselves and with our genius, we need to start encouraging this conversation around what expands your energy. And most people, if you get them out in nature for more than a day, or if you get them out in nature for a couple hours, their energy changes. Their nervous system starts to regulate. The parasympathetic nervous system starts to relax. And when we are walking around in a relaxed state, we're more open to our energetic awareness. We're more receptive to the messages and the signals. So next time you want to have a panic attack, you can go, oh, what is my body aware of? And you might still have the panic attack, but then you can take the pressure off of assuming that it's a problem, that it's a wrongness. Now, my body, when there are natural disasters, once in a while, it'll shake, it'll shudder, it'll go through something. And most of the time, I'm like, oh, something's happening on the planet. Something's happening in our government. Some war, right? And this, excuse me, isn't, oh my goodness, isn't always for, like, I'm not necessarily always connected to every place in the planet, but I believe that every individual has certain geographical places in the world in which they have an energetic connection. And that energetic connection might be a past lifetime that you need to release out of your body. That energetic connection might be just a knowing or a genius or a brilliance. So a couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of being in Budapest, one of my favorite cities in the world. And I was told that in Budapest, in this particular region outside of Budapest, was this heart center, right? And I went there and I was thinking, oh yeah, it's going to be so light and open. And it was, there was a little bit of a darkness there. There was a little bit of an energy where I had probably been in that land, on that land, at a different time period, in a different lifetime. And so sometimes our bodies, when we fly and travel to different places, we have different physical or energetic responses to that place in the world, right? When I used to go to Rome, I used to get really puffy and swollen because my body knows that if it gains weight, if it hangs on to inflammation or water weight, right, or gets puffy, it gets my attention immediately because I don't like that feeling, right? And so there were times I was going to Rome 2 to 3 times a year, and every time I would go, my body would get bigger before I would go. And we're talking like one time it was like the day before leaving, and I'm trying on all my clothes, and all of a sudden my baggy, loose clothes are really tight. I have no room. All I ate that day was like an apple and some cheese, right? So no reason to be completely inflamed or hang on to a bunch of water weight. But yeah, my body was giving me a signal that I needed to pay attention to. And I called a friend, and I was able to recognize and sort of put the pieces of the puzzle together and go, oh my gosh, every time I go to Rome, my body does this. Okay, let's get curious about it. Let's be, educated and informed and curious instead of this is the answer. And so I had this, and I'm even getting goosebumps telling this story. I had this really profound experience and profound awakening that I was supposed to do something specifically in Rome, specifically at an institution, right? At a sort of a famous, iconic place that people go visit when they go to Rome. And I went, and I got a ton of downloads. I got a ton of information, but was also able to release some stuck energies, some past lifetimes. Now, I didn't need to know exactly what they were. I just needed to let the density of the thickness in my body go. And after I did that, my body calmed down and went back to its normal size within a day. So we're talking in a day, my body, the equivalent of gaining 10 pounds. And then in a day, the equivalent of losing 10 pounds. And so when your body isn't losing weight, it doesn't feel like you're connected to it. It's probably not because it's about food necessarily, but because it's about what? The language of energy, the language of being aware and the curiosity of tapping into sort of an invisible, unseen, sometimes unspoken world. Sometimes I feel like I speak a different language because my form of communicating is in energy. And so people are always like, well, do you follow politics? And do you know what's happening in the world? And yes, I get aware of certain things when I need to, when I want to, when I'm curious for my own and informative, I want to inform myself. But my sort of genius is tapping into topics, right? That I get curious about, that fascinate me, and then downloading the information. I didn't study, right? I didn't spend years in university around certain topics. I just got curious and I started to open up the channel. So if you're on the spectrum, if you have a kid that's on the spectrum, you want to invite yourself to open up your own channel of curiosity, right? So you can inform yourself, educate yourself. You want to encourage your child's, right? So my son is going into 6th grade and he's got a lot of schoolwork this year that he is not looking forward to. And I am going to do my best as his mother to encourage, right? Thought about homeschooling, but he thrives on connection. He thrives on the sports that they offer. He thrives on, interactions that he gets with kids. He thrives in gym. He thrives in art. He thrives in music. And so you want to be aware of if you do have children, if you work with children, where are they being drawn to, right? Where is their connection and their aliveness and their excitement? And then sort of educate them, encourage them to go down a path that maybe no one else can see that excites them, right? Maybe get curious, right? Ask them some questions where they spend their time daydreaming. What if they could wave a magic wand? What would they want their future to look and feel like? Where in the planet would they like to live, right? What sort of people do they want to hang around with? Much more, you'll get much more information out of your children and out of yourself and out of the people in your life that you adore by asking those questions, not necessarily what do you want to do, right? But more like, where do you spend your energy? So I was talking with someone who is in her mid-20s. She's feeling a little aimless and a little lost about what to do next, right? She's also dealing with some life circumstances. But I just had this conversation with her and I was like, and I just said, what would you, and this is a question you can ask all of your kids, you can ask yourself, especially for those of you who are like, I wonder how I could make money. I wonder if I could start my own business. I wonder what I could sort of do as a career. If you could, right? What would you spend, right, all day long doing for free? And when you do it, time disappears. When you do it, you forget you're hungry. When you do it, like things start to open up in your world. What would you do all day long for free? And when you start to get curious about it, it will begin to give you information about the next path. So to recap, some of the things that you can do is if you could spend all day long, right, doing what you love for free, right? Time disappears, you forget, like you're hungry, right? What would you do? Right? Some people say, well, I would hang out with this person. I'm like, great, spend more time with that person. I was talking to someone this weekend. They're like, yeah, when I'm with this person, it's like time disappears. And it wasn't a romantic relationship. It was sort of a business relationship. And they're like, time disappears. It's like we could go days and not look at the clock. And it's like that is where I believe that we need to be sort of encouraging both ourselves and others to spend time. And I think that our bodies would get healthier, our digestion would improve, our nervous system would be more calm and more regulated. And when our nervous system is calm and regulated, what? It reduces stress, it reduces cortisol pump, it reduces the adrenaline pump, right? It releases trapped trauma, it can release stuck emotions. There's so many benefits. And so for all of you out there that might be pretty quick to label or diagnose, I want to encourage you instead, maybe ask a question. Right? So inviting you and your children to be aware, right? Inviting yourself to seek what expands and kind of move away from what contracts your energy, right? And see what is available to you when you start to pay attention to how things make you feel, right? And so I was watching a TV program and the guy kept going, I have ADHD. It was like a reality TV show, right? I have ADHD, I have ADHD. And you could see his, this grown man, very adept, very smart, very brilliant, but not necessarily brilliant in a way that this society sort of puts a medal on or a ribbon on or gives a trophy to. A different kind of brilliance. And you could see his shame. You could see his insecurity. Guess what? That affects his relationships. That affects his self-esteem to encourage his imagination. So he has this, and look, I'm just reading his energy, right? I was reading his energy. It's like, wow, this man has such an incredible imagination. And guess what? He gets overwhelmed in crowds, right? He doesn't like big social interactions. He loves one-on-one, but these are clues that if you're somebody who doesn't like a lot of social interaction, it drains you. You might have a gift or capacity that you might be making wrong, right? If you are an introvert, if you don't like big crowds, if they do drain you, if you get anxiety and you notice you start to shut down or your fight or flight nervous system smoke alarm goes off, right? Ringing the bell like a bear's chasing you. When that's happening, we can't be our best selves. We can't receive our intuition. We can't allow that broad spectrum of energy and information to come our way. So next time, perhaps you will start to look at this differently. You'll start to be curious about it. And you'll start to notice that there's a different world out there. So for anyone listening, you can go to my website for just poke around. I've got tons of interesting content. But if you would like a free download on some nervous system regulating movements that you can do by yourself, you can teach your kids this, you can bring it into the classroom. This will help people relax. And when people are relaxed, they're more apt to live in their genius, be open to the world around them, and one by one, we can change the planet. So I just want to thank you for listening. If this conversation inspired you, if you would like more, please send us an email, leave us a comment, go visit the website, reach out in any way you'd like to, and I look forward to seeing you next time. So bye for now, and I hope you all have a magical, magical, magical day. So website, CatherineMcIntosh.com, free download, and we'll see you next time.
Catherine is not a medical practitioner nor a licensed therapist. She has strong opinions and will express them, and truly believes that you are your best advocate for any and every area of your life. If you need medical advice, please consult your physician.